of 7 astronauts, all tragically lost. I'm Greg Jarrett, together with Derry Alexander, to take you through the next couple of hours. Just 16 minutes before landing, there you see it, Columbia streaking across the blue Texas sky. Something went terribly wrong. It broke apart in flames. It appeared to disintegrate. Much of it caught on several different versions of videotape as you see it. It would have been impossible for the 6 Americans and 1 Israeli to have survived the Mach 7 speed, some 12,000 miles per hour at an altitude of roughly 200,000 feet. It's gone, said one senior U.S. official. There is no particular official word from NASA. That may happen any moment now at a news briefing, but symbolic confirmation of our worst fears came more than 2 hours ago when the American flag next to the countdown clock at the Kennedy Space Center was lowered this morning to half-staff. So too at the nation's capital and at the White House. Debris, as you have seen, and we've been showing you videotape of that from several chopper views, found on the ground, confirmed to be that of Columbia, bits of metal and machinery. We are sad to report some human remains. Apparently, that has not been confirmed. The dramatic footage, though, as you're seeing it here once again, showing this sort of bright light in the sky, followed by plumes of smoke streaking diagonally through the air. Debris appeared to break off into separate balls of light as it continued downward, astonishing the people on the ground. President of the United States notified immediately where he was spending the weekend at Camp David. He cut that short, headed back to the White House. We are waiting word officially from the president. The administration, though, says there is no indication of evidence of terrorism. One official made 2 very important points. We want to repeat them once again in case you're just joining us now, 1 o'clock Eastern time, 10 a.m. out west. There was no threat to this particular mission in terms of terrorism, and importantly, the shuttle was out of range of a surface-to-air missile. Remember, it was very high in the sky. It was the 113th flight in the shuttle program's 22 years, 28th for Columbia, the oldest orbiter in the program. If we can, let's put up a picture of the crew of 7, 6 Americans and 1 Israeli. They are Commander Rick Husband, 45 years old, Air Force Colonel from Texas. Pilot William McCool, 41 years old, Navy Commander from Lubbock, Texas. Payload Commander Michael Anderson, 43 years old. Kaplana Chawla, who is 41 years old, immigrated to the U.S. from India. David Brown, 46-year-old, a Navy captain. Laurel Clark, who was 41 years old, a Navy diving medical officer aboard submarines before she became an astronaut back in 1996. And Ilan Ramon, 48 years old, a colonel in the Israeli Air Force, a hero to a great many Israelis. Columbia's crew had completed more than 80 scientific experiments during their time in orbit. Derry?
And of course, all eyes are on NASA as well as Washington. We're waiting for some sort of response from the president. In fact, let's go to Brett Baer, who is our Pentagon correspondent, to find out what is the latest and any reaction. Brett, are you there?
Hi, Derry. We are here waiting, obviously, for the NASA statement from Houston, but we will see something from the Pentagon that we have been noticing over the past few hours. There has, after the beginning of this, there was a video teleconference with Pentagon representatives as well as the commanders of Strategic Command and Northern Command, we're told. They were all working with FEMA and NASA at the beginning of this entire situation. We can tell you that Strategic Command, under that command, there is a specific support element at the 45th Space Wing, that is Patrick Air Force Base at Cape Canaveral. Essentially, it's called the Department of Defense Manned Space Flight Support. They provide astronaut rescue and recovery, airlift in the case of emergency. Pentagon officials tell us that Strategic Command, as well as Northern Command, which is in charge of Homeland Security, has been very active in this, working with FEMA and NASA. Also, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld is at the Pentagon and has been consulted and is continuing to monitor this situation as it develops.
Brett, I want to ask you a quick question. Perhaps you may not be the person to answer this, but we've been hearing reports that on January 16th, shortly after the Columbia lifted off, a piece of insulating foam on its external fuel tank came off and was believed to have struck the left wing of the shuttle. But then a leading flight director in mission control did assure reporters on Friday that the engineers had concluded that there wasn't any damage to the wing and was not considered to pose any safety hazard. So of course now everyone is wondering whether or not there could have been anything to that particular insulating foam damage.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation going on right now. As you mentioned, NASA came out and said that foam hitting the wing did not affect operations at the time. There is obviously a lot of things second guessing going on right now. Hopefully we will hear more for this news conference, at this news conference from NASA about what they are looking at. We will likely, however, hear about operations recovering different parts of the debris and also what is ongoing as far as monitoring the situation. From the Pentagon point of view, I can tell you that a lot of things are in motion working with FEMA and NASA at this hour.
All right, Brett Baer, thanks so much for that.
If you are a reporter in Florida, you cover space shuttle launches routinely as well as some of their landings. And so joining us right now from Tampa, Florida, WTVT's Warren Ellie. Warren, what can you tell us?
Well, Greg, like everyone else, it's a checklist in your mind. After seeing so many of these launches and landings and watch so many of these missions, you start clicking off. I can't get away from that piece of insulation or whatever it was. NASA says it was insulation. I've looked at that tape this morning. It's hard to tell. The orbiter is inverted at the point in the launch procedure when you see this piece, something, coming off what appears to be the port side area. Whether it's off the main tank or perhaps a tile off the shuttle, I don't know. But that certainly is going to have to be job one for NASA to either eliminate that or expound on its significance. A thing that sticks in my mind as well is these reports we've heard about tire pressure on the same side, on that port side of the orbiter building so highly at just before this data was lost. Of course, these are all bits and pieces, but you'd think that if there was something wrong under that wing, that might be an indication. Another is this matter of the computers that Senator Nelson was speaking about with Shepard Smith in the last hour. Certainly, the critical nature of the angle of attack and the rest has to be a big focus. Another that sticks in my mind is the matter of the crew module. This is, if you will, the inside of a thermos, the vessel, a pressurized vessel. And we recall in the Challenger tragedy, this vessel was intact as it descended, and then of course came apart on the impact with the Atlantic. That territory there, such dense forest and swampy areas, as I understand in Texas, it's going to be difficult to find these bits and pieces. And the other thing that rings strongly to one who's watched so many of these missions is really the safety record of NASA. One can't lose track of all these missions, 113, two of them now tragically, but out of 113, all the processes, the tens of thousands of bits and pieces and computer links, all the things that have to work to make this happen. Certainly we can't lose focus of how well this system has worked. And I must say, though there has been a good deal of complacency among the news media in recent years, I'd say, at the Space Center, NASA hasn't shown any signs, although there's been some controversy about the privatization of the program, these kinds of things, but there haven't been anything but positive indications. Whenever tiny cracks, for example, were found in fuel lines or issues were raised about bearings in these fuel lines, everything was stopped. They put the brakes on these launches, so there isn't much evidence, as there was before the Challenger disaster, about the ice, for example, on the Challenger launch pad. You don't see that kind of complacency, Greg, at least leading up to this. So just a few thoughts this morning as we try to figure this out.
And good ones. Warren Ellie, thank you very much. WTVT in Tampa, Florida.
You know, and just touching on that point that Warren was saying, it is important to remember that in the 42-year history of U.S. human spaceflight, there has never been an accident during descent to Earth or landing. Never been an accident in descent to Earth or landing. And in fact, of course, at this point, all we know is that the Space Shuttle Columbia has disintegrated into Earth. Don't know the causes, only speculation at this point, and that is why we are waiting on a press conference from NASA. We're expected to give us some information at 1 o'clock Eastern from the Kennedy Space Center. Again, hopefully they can fill in some of the blanks for us. But meantime, we want to talk to somebody who has certainly got a lot of background on touching down and landing. James Oberg, he's a Space Shuttle flight controller. And James, I just want you to walk me through this. What is it like? Imagine 9 a.m. Eastern today. The shuttle is to touch down at 9:16. Johnson Space Center in Houston loses contact with the shuttle. What is going on at this point?
Well, Derry, there are lots of things that flight controllers have in their hip pockets for what they call contingency situations. You start going, you assume something's gone wrong, and that the crew knows it and they're doing something else, and you try to coordinate almost by telepathy. This frequently does happen, and it usually has a happy ending because you get back in touch. In this case, though, there was such a time-critical nature here. The shuttle was supposed to show up on the runway, and when it didn't, it was clear that it wasn't just a radio communication problem. It was a problem with the actual vehicle, as we now see. But what you're doing when you first have this loss of communication is to, again, go through your checklist, because people practice. We drilled real hard in Mission Control when I was there, especially with these emergencies. 80% of the training we did was for things that never actually happened, but might have happened. In that case, we had to be ready.
And James, you know, just help me out. As far as I understand, there were no reports prior to losing contact of any problems aboard the shuttle, right?
That's not certain. Actually, Derry, there are a number of rumors passing around now, and our basic rule, as you should realize, especially in the news business, is that 80% of the earliest rumors are false. But we'll have to put it together. There was one thing that bothered some of us observers, some people who weren't involved directly, and that was during the launch of the shuttle, some days ago, 16 days ago, there was a particularly large white object came off the external tank. It might have been insulation or ice, and hit under the left wing. And we couldn't see where the impact occurred because the camera angle wasn't right, but there was a splatter, and white dust came down from behind the wing down below. People who looked at that, and they are real experts, concluded it was a light piece of insulation that shattered and probably didn't do any damage. And part of the thing we learn in Mission Control is you depend on each other's expertise. So this was looked at, and there was no anxiety expressed about it, but maybe that was a misjudgment.
You know, James, one other question. I don't know if you can see our video of the shuttle coming down. I'm just wondering, for you, did you know exactly what was going on when we see that the shuttle coming down, and then we see these little sparks of what is now said to be debris? I mean, was that it for you?
Derry, that's exactly right, because unfortunately, with the familiarity we have in the program with what it should look like, when it doesn't look like that, it's real distressing. Surprise is bad. Boredom is good. I don't mind being bored on a mission when nothing's going wrong. In this case, and because, you see, here in Texas, we're just uprange about 1,000 miles from the Kennedy Space Center where the landings occur. And we, on occasion, have the shuttles come overhead, usually at night because you can see the fireball. They leave a spectacular trail across the entire sky, a glowing golden fireball trailing an iridescent white, milky white trail that hangs in the sky for minutes afterward. That's what it should look like. Once this thing started coming apart, once there were multiple pieces, it was obvious something very bad had happened. It had turned sideways somehow into the slipstream, the Mach 12 slipstream, and been torn into fragments. So the fuels in the back end of the shuttle mixed and exploded. The hazardous chemicals probably all burned off 40 miles up. But now they're picking up the confetti-sized debris around East Texas, and now we know why.
Exactly. James Oberg, Space Shuttle Flight Controller, thank you so much for that info.
Among the 7 astronauts lost on board the Space Shuttle Columbia, the first Israeli in space, a hero to all in Israel, Ilan Ramon, 48 years old, a colonel in Israel's Air Force. And as we point out, this was important, the first Israeli in space. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon has issued a brief statement, quote, "The state of Israel and its citizens stand at this difficult hour alongside the families of the astronauts, the family of Ilan Ramon, and the American people and government." Joining us now from that government, the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Daniel Ayalon. Mr. Ambassador, our condolences to the people of Israel as well as the family of Ilan Ramon. What have you been told? What has your government been told about this?
A few hours ago by Sean O'Keefe, the administrator of NASA, who told me about the mishap, about this great tragedy. They are still looking at the details and at the situation, but they were briefing us right from the start. I called and briefed my Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, and Foreign Minister Bibi Netanyahu. And this is a great, great tragedy for Israel, for the United States, but mainly for the families. And I am on my way this afternoon. I'm going to Houston to be with the family of Ilan Ramon. You know his very special story, being a son of a Holocaust survivor. So for us, for Israel, it was a very special occasion, and we are so filled with pride and hope. And now this great tragedy is just beyond comprehension.
Ilan Ramon, his father fought for Israel's statehood alongside his grandfather. Ramon himself fought in the Yom Kippur War of 1973, the Lebanon War in 1982. He was a very, very distinguished fighter pilot in the 1970s, the 80s, early 90s. I mean, talk to us about how much he meant to the people of Israel.
Yes, indeed. Well, not only he was the first Israeli astronaut on board, which is a history in itself, but his human story, I think, embodies the story of the people of Israel and of the Jewish people. He was a very brave pilot with distinguished career. He was really bent on excellence and of achievements, and it really embodied the spirit of Israel. And of course, being a second generation of Holocaust survivors, I think this is really showing the victory of the human spirit. You know, he carried with him to space a drawing of a young Jewish boy who perished in the Holocaust, and the drawing was of the Earth as he imagined it would look from space. He took it with him to space, and this is in just 2 generations where the Jewish people were on the verge of demise, on the lowest ebb. Here we were soaring into excellence, into the cutting edge of technology. So of course it was very, very symbolic for us, on top of the fact that here we are cooperating with our best friend and ally, the United States, taking the cooperation between these 2 countries into further dimensions out of space.
I can assure you this country feels terrible not only for its own, but for the loss to the Israeli people as well.
Thank you. We really appreciate it, and condolences to our American brothers and friends. And we are together in that, and this is a tragic day. We will overcome it because we are still filled with pride. The legacy of these astronauts will fill us in pride, both in the United States and in Israel.
When you spoke to the Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, via the telephone, what was his reaction? How did he take this?
Of great sadness. First of all, he wanted to know all the details as they were unfolding. And then, of course, with great sadness, he issued the statement, as you saw, also extending condolences to our American friends. And he never forgot that on board were also 6 American astronauts. And again, in this tragedy, our fate, our grief is intertwined.
Once again, our heartfelt condolences to the Israeli people. The Israeli ambassador to the United States, Daniel Ayalon, thank you for joining us in this very difficult moment. We appreciate it.
We know our president was spending the weekend at Camp David when his White House Chief of Staff, Andy Card, let him know of the Columbia disaster. The president then was rushed by motorcade to the White House, where we are expecting at some point for him to make some sort of statement about this disaster. Let's go to James Rosen, who is in Washington for us with the latest. James.
Derry, good afternoon from the White House, where President Bush has returned, as you say, from Camp David, where he was planning to spend the weekend. The president, with his Chief of Staff, Andrew Card, and others, having arrived here back at the White House within the last hour. The president spoke with the NASA Administrator, Sean O'Keefe, shortly after this incident occurred at around 10:38 a.m. That's when the president spoke with O'Keefe. Very shortly thereafter, the determination seems to have been made, a senior administration official at the White House and also an official at the CIA telling Fox News that there is no belief that this is connected to terrorist activity. The Homeland Security Secretary, Tom Ridge, made his way to the White House shortly after the incident occurred. He has been talking by telephone with officials in at least 5 states, including Texas, Louisiana, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oklahoma, talking with those state officials in those states about the handling of the debris that has rained down on those states, apparently from Space Shuttle Columbia. The National Security Advisor, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, also raced into work at the White House to monitor the situation. The flag at the White House over the president's residence was lowered to half-staff in the last hour or so, and just a few minutes ago, the American flag that flies over the Eisenhower Executive Office building just across the way from the White House was also lowered to half-staff. As we have been hearing from our Pentagon correspondent, Brett Baer, the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, is at the Pentagon. What President Bush has been doing since he arrived back here at the White House in just the last 40 minutes or so has been conferring with officials. We expect that he will, if he has not already, placed a condolence call to the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, of course, to note the sadness of the American people, not only over the loss of the Americans on board, but over the loss of Colonel Ramon. And as well, we expect that the president will make some kind of statement to the American people, not only because it would be customary at such a time for the commander-in-chief to address the American people, but also because we actually spotted White House employees moving the presidential podium from the Eisenhower Executive Office building across the way to the West Wing portion of the White House. So that's where it stands from the White House. Greg and Derry, back to you.
Curious, Dick Cheney, our vice president, has a home in Dallas, is a resident of Dallas, and we understand was in Texas hunting for the weekend. I'm just wondering if there have been any reports of him hearing anything.
Well, we are told that Vice President Cheney was nowhere near where the accident occurred, if indeed it is found to be an accident, but that he is unscathed and unharmed as a result of this. But Vice President Cheney, as you know, takes part in all national security deliberations when they are held with the National Security.
We're going to go live to the news conference at NASA. Let's listen in.
About STS-107. We will have no questions today, just a few brief remarks.
As indicated earlier, we'll make a statement today, and then at this point, and a little later this afternoon at about 3 o'clock Eastern Time, there'll be a full technical briefing conducted from the Johnson Space Center. So at this point, we're just going to give you the circumstances as we understand them leading up to this particular tragedy today. This is indeed a tragic day for the NASA family, for the families of the astronauts who flew on STS-107, and likewise tragic for the nation. Immediately upon indication of a loss of communications on STS-107, at a little after 9 a.m. this morning, we began our contingency plan to preserve all the information relative to the flight activities. I immediately advised the President and the Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary Tom Ridge, at the point after landing was due to have occurred at 9:16, spoke to them very briefly thereafter to advise that we had lost contact with the Shuttle Orbiter Columbia and STS-107 crew. They offered, the President specifically offered, full and immediate support to determine what the appropriate steps were thereafter to be taken. We then spent the next hour and a half working through the detail and information of what we have received, and Bill Reedy will walk you through the specifics of those operational and technical issues here in just a moment. Thereafter, we have met with the family members of the astronauts who were here at Kennedy Space Center and are soon to be departing back to Johnston, to Houston. The President has called and spoken to them to express our deepest national regrets. We have assured them that we will begin the process immediately to recover their loved ones and understand the cause of this tragedy. At this time, we have no indication that the mishap was caused by anything or anyone on the ground. We've assembled a mishap investigation team that immediately was assembled upon the point of past the stage in which the orbiter was to have landed here at Kennedy Space Center a little after 9:30, and that team in turn is coordinating on a regular basis on all the facts that are pertaining to this from the Johnson Space Center, and a rapid response team from here at the Kennedy Space Center, as well as participants from the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. In addition to these internal efforts, we have also appointed a mishap investigation board, an external group of people who are independent from NASA, who will immediately be charged with the opportunity to look at all the information that was immediately locked down right after our absence of communications. Each of these individuals are safety and mission assurance related officials in other federal departments of the federal government, from the Air Force, from the Navy, from the Department of Transportation, and across the federal expanse. The investigation team will also be chaired by an individual contacted to serve who is external to the federal agencies, and we'll have the opportunity to coordinate all the information again from an external view. So we'll be conducting both the internal activity as well as an external review immediately to ascertain the causes and circumstances under which this tragedy occurred. We've pulled together all the federal agencies and local governments as well. In discussion several times this morning with Secretary Tom Ridge, the effort is heavily underway to coordinate an understanding of exactly where the orbiter path had taken it from West Texas towards the Kennedy Space Center here in Florida, and to make sure that the material on the ground is secured so that the investigation can begin promptly. We would urge anyone who believes they have discovered or found any material to stay away from it and to please contact local officials. The local first responder groups for emergency services and so forth have been authorized and directed by Secretary Tom Ridge to assist in all manner. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is coordinating that effort on the part of the Department of Homeland Security. I was here this morning with the families of the astronauts and their friends. It started out as a pretty happy morning, awaiting the landing of STS-107, and we had highly anticipated their return because we couldn't wait to congratulate them for their extraordinary performance and their excellent efforts on the science mission on this very important flight. They dedicated their lives to pushing the scientific challenges for all of us here on Earth. And they dedicated themselves to that objective and did it with a happy heart, willingly, and with great enthusiasm. The loss of this valiant crew is something we will never be able to get over, and certainly the families of all of them, we have assured we will do everything we can possibly do to guarantee that they work their way through this horrific tragedy. We ask the members of the media to honor that too. To please respect their privacy and please understand the tragedy that they are going through at this time. We will help the media assure that be the case as well. We trust that the prayers of the nation will be with them and with their families. And again, a more courageous group of people you could not have hoped to know than the families of these crew members. And an extraordinary, extraordinary group of astronauts who gave their lives and did it in a way that they knew exactly the risk, but never, ever, do we ever want to see a circumstance where something like this could ever happen. And we diligently dedicate ourselves every single day to assuring these things don't occur. And when they do, we have to act responsibly, accountably, and that's exactly what we will do. To give you more of the operational detail of what has occurred here since 9 a.m. this morning, the Associate Administrator for Spaceflight, a former astronaut, retired captain of the United States Navy, former test flight pilot, Bill Reedy, who has commanded 2 separate missions previously and as an astronaut, and is now, again, our Associate Administrator for Spaceflight, and has worked with me all morning along with all of us here at Kennedy Space Center to work through the details of the events as we know them and to present to you the facts that we understand them. Again, the technical details that are being worked very diligently now will be covered again at 3 p.m. this afternoon out of the Johnson Space Center. With that, let me turn it over to Captain Bill Reedy.
It's a truly difficult day for all of us. Many of us were standing alongside the runway waiting to celebrate their triumphant return after a 16-day science mission. I think you could tell from the downlink that they loved what they were doing and they thought what they were doing was extremely important, pushing back those boundaries in science. At 9 o'clock, we heard that they had lost data from the spacecraft, and it appears that that was at about 200,000 feet, about Mach 18. The loss of data was somewhere over north central Texas, and at the planned landing time of 9:16, we initiated our contingency action plan called the Rescue Coordination Center and initiated a search and rescue effort. Sadly, I think from the video that's available, it does not appear that there were any survivors. We have currently impounded all the data, including all the pre-flight certification of flight readiness for STS-107. And at this point, I'd have to say it's too early to speculate about the exact cause. Obviously, we're looking at all the data that we have available. Those people that have videos, those people that have still pictures, we'll urge you to contact NASA so that we can coordinate those things that might be available. And to reiterate what the administrator said, those people that may find debris, do not touch it, do not move it. Contact your local authorities, have them impound it and secure the area so that our technical specialists will be able to piece together the puzzle so that we can resolve what happened. Our immediate focus is on the crew, families, and we spent some time with them. The President called. I'd have to say the families are bearing up with an incredible amount of dignity considering their loss. We all grieve for them. We all pray with them for the crew. But one thing came across loud and clear when visiting with them is they knew that the crew was absolutely dedicated to the mission that they were performing. And I think you could see that in the video downlink. They believed in what they were doing. And in the conversations with the crew and their families, they said that we must find what happened and fix it and move on. And we can't let their sacrifice be in vain. Today was a very stark reminder that this is a very risky endeavor pushing back the frontiers in outer space, and after 113 flights, unfortunately, people have a tendency to look at it as something that is more or less routine. Well, I can assure you it is not. Each and every time I flew, each and every time my colleagues flew, we treated that with the respect that it deserved from a professional standpoint. And I have to say that as the one responsible for Shuttle and Station within the NASA, that I know that the people of NASA did everything possible preparing for this flight to make it as perfect as possible. My promise to the crew and to the crew families is that the investigation that we have just launched will find the cause, we'll fix it, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Again, we know you all have questions, and we will have a news briefing at 3 o'clock, and we'll give you that opportunity at that time. Thank you.
We have been watching the news briefing by NASA. Doing most of the talking, Sean O'Keefe, who is the NASA administrator, he called this a tragic day for NASA, the NASA family, astronauts, and indeed the nation. He recounted the sequence of events beginning roughly at 8 a.m. Central Time when communications with the Shuttle Columbia was suddenly lost. He immediately notified the President of the United States and the Director of Homeland Security. The President pledged all appropriate resources to find out what happened and why. You're looking at some of the dramatic videotape which we have frozen, and we are moving in on it closer and closer. This is the debris after the explosion, and now you see a smoking crater on the ground. It has been confirmed from the Shuttle Columbia. None of the 7 astronauts could possibly have survived. And on that point, the NASA administrator said that NASA officials had met with each of the family members who will now come from Florida to Houston, Texas. And he pledged that we will work to recover the remains of the astronauts, though obviously from the scene you are looking at, that will be extremely difficult. He said there is no reason to believe that this mishap, as he referred to it, was caused by anyone or anything on the ground. That is to say, he is reinforcing what the Director of Homeland Security as well as White House officials have been telling us, that there is absolutely no evidence that this is terrorist-related, that this specific shuttle mission was not the subject of a particular threat. And indeed, the altitude of the shuttle when it exploded was way above that of any surface-to-air missile that could have conceivably been bringing it down. He pledged an internal and external set of investigations. But the most difficult moment obviously came when he talked about the human side of what has happened over the last several hours. You could hear the pain in his voice, Sean O'Keefe. You could see the anguish in his face as he was nearly brought to tears. A more courageous group of people, he said, you could not know. It bears repeating the names of those courageous people, 7 of them. Rick Husband, 45 years old, the commander. William McCool, the pilot, 41 years old. Payload commander Michael Anderson, 43 years old. Kalpana Chawla, 41 years old, became an astronaut in 1994 from India. David Brown, 46 years old, a Navy captain. Laurel Clark, who is a specialist on board this and also a doctor. And of course, the lone Israeli, the first Israeli in space, Ilan Ramon, 48 years old, a colonel in the Air Force there, a beloved figure in Israel. His wife and 4 children were here in America as he had been training for this mission. I want to remind you once again that in about an hour and 20 minutes there will be yet another briefing by NASA, and this one will be a more technical briefing, and apparently they will respond to reporters' questions who are gathered there. Joining us now is somebody who knows very, very well the risks that are involved in these missions. Former New Mexico Senator and former Apollo 17 astronaut, Senator Harrison Schmitt joins us on the telephone. Senator, thank you very much for being with us. When you learned this morning, as the rest of a grieving nation did, what had happened, what were your thoughts?
Well, immediately, I think my thoughts were probably the same as just about everyone else, a feeling of great sadness, but a realization, maybe more than most, certainly as with my colleagues, that the 7 crew member of STS-107 were doing exactly what they wished to do during the last few days, and they were all volunteers, well aware of the risks of spaceflight, which haven't gone away in spite of the accessibility of near-Earth space, and that the exploration of that space, the use of that space, should continue.
Senator, every astronaut who has the courage to go up in space is a hero, and we have a great many questions for you as well. If you would, for just a few minutes, stand by if you could. We would appreciate it. We're talking to former New Mexico
Hello?
Senator and former Apollo 17 astronaut Harrison Schmitt.
Hello? Yes, Catherine Watson, a former NASA administrator. You're on the line with us. Catherine.
I'm sorry, this is Catherine Watson from the Johnson Space Center.
Yes, Catherine, this obviously is a tragic day for the NASA family. And the thing that is so ironic about this is these missions had become incredibly routine, so obviously you all are devastated by the fact that you've lost 7 astronauts, but also the fact that this was not supposed to happen. What is going on right now for you all?
Well, first of all, we're never nonchalant about spaceflight. Anyone who's part of spaceflight understands that there's a great deal of risk involved. But right now, the controllers in the Mission Control Center have saved all their data, all their paperwork, gathering all that up for both the internal and the external teams that are going to be looking at this situation.
And I understand that a mishap investigation board is going to be assembled that is actually outside of NASA. There will be safety mission-related officials from the federal government. What will they be able to offer?
This is something that most organizations do when something like this happens. You have your internal group that will gather all the data and do an internal investigation, but you also bring in outsiders with a fresh perspective who can take a look at the situation.
And tell me, what information now do you have about that moment, 9 a.m., that loss of communication at the Johnson Space Center?
We have all the telemetry we were receiving from the various systems aboard Columbia right at the moment that we lost communications. So we have telemetry from every system aboard Columbia right up to that moment, and that's what we're going to be looking at to try and determine exactly what happened.
And at this point, tell me, and obviously we've gotten confirmation from the White House, but how can we be so sure that this was not terrorist-related?
I'm sure that they've taken a look at their data. They were also very, very high. They were at 200,000 feet. You know, I mean, of course, that's not something you can rule out until you absolutely determine. But at this point, we don't believe that that was the case at all. It appeared to just have broken up.
And Catherine, I wanted to ask you actually 2 things. We had heard conflicting reports that, well, at first we'd heard that there had been no communication or any reports from the shuttle of any problems prior to losing contact. Do you have any information as to whether or not there was any kind of radio transmission or any reports of any problems with the shuttle before they lost contact?
No, everything appeared to be going normally. They did a normal re-entry burn. They were re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, doing everything that they normally do when they get ready for landing.
And, you know, another question. January 16th, shortly after the Columbia lifted off, we had heard also that insulating foam on its external fuel tank came off and actually hit the left wing of the shuttle. And then we'd heard reports that, in fact, this would pose no damage to the shuttle. But, of course, now a lot of questions about whether or not there could have been or that could have been a contributing factor to what happened today.
Well, that's one of the questions the internal and the external teams are going to have to get together to talk about. We're gathering all the data. We're going to do quite a few tests to try and determine if that could have been a factor.
Catherine, what about the fact that Columbia is NASA's oldest shuttle?
Actually, it had just come out of a couple of years ago. It had just had a total refurbishment, all sorts of brand new equipment, and it was in excellent shape before it launched.
So at this point, is there any idea as to what could have caused this accident? I know we're getting a briefing at 3 Eastern with more technical information, but at this point, what are you preliminarily hearing?
Nothing definitive at this point. We're really waiting for the ground controllers who are monitoring all the systems on Columbia to gather their data, to get together to look at it, and we're hoping to have more information to give to you at our briefing.
And I'm just curious, this was a first space flight for a few of the astronauts. Obviously, this is incredibly tragic, but I'm just curious, could experience have anything to do with anything that happened here today?
No, the commander was an incredibly experienced astronaut and a pilot. All of our astronauts are test pilots with thousands of hours in, dozens of different aircraft, and they train literally for hundreds and thousands of hours making these entries over and over again in the simulator. So no, that wouldn't be an issue at all.
All right, Catherine Watson, the NASA administrator, we certainly thank you.
Actually, I'm just a NASA public affairs specialist.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you for that clarification.
Very welcome.
44 minutes past the hour. The Space Shuttle Columbia broke apart in air, in flames over Texas today, killing all 7 astronauts on board just 16 minutes before they were to glide to their landing strip in Florida. Rejoining us now on the telephone, former astronaut on Apollo 17 and former New Mexico Senator Harrison Schmitt. Mr. Schmitt, thank you for being patient with us. Senator, though you did not ride on a shuttle, but rather an Apollo spacecraft capsule, both spacecraft have to re-enter Earth's atmosphere. Talk to us about the speed, the friction, the heat, the danger that re-entry poses.
Well, the Apollo spacecraft re-entered at about twice the speed of the entry of the space shuttle. It did not have wings. It was a much simpler structural configuration. But entering at a very, very high speed, it still actually flew in the atmosphere, but at much higher deceleration levels than the shuttle. We actually had a brief period of 7 times gravity, 7 Gs, during entry, and then held for several minutes, held almost 4 Gs as we flew to where our carrier was waiting our arrival. The space shuttle, in contrast, enters very gradually. It pulls, as I recall, less than 1.5 Gs most of the time. It is at 17,500 miles per hour as it enters, and then conducts a number of maneuvers to begin to bleed off the energy as it can use aerodynamic forces to do that. It still will be subject to very high stress, aerodynamic stresses, but the shuttle has designed and actually proven itself as being able to handle these stresses. NASA, from what I heard through the press conference and other statements, appears to be moving expeditiously to institute an accident investigation, as they should. Everything I've heard sounds like they're following exactly the right procedures that are developed in quieter times to make sure that all the data is available and all the information possible is gathered to benefit that accident investigation.
Well, speaking of that, given the breadth of your experience as a former astronaut and your administrative experience as a United States Senator, what are some of the things that they would be looking at in this investigation?
Oh, they will. The most valuable information initially will, of course, be the telemetry that was being gathered and recorded in Houston.
And what does that mean?
Well, that's the data from all the various sensors that the spacecraft has that relate to the critical systems that would be operating at the time of the accident and been operating before, and they'll be looking for any trends or any anomalies in that data, as well as trying to recover, and it's extremely important for everybody who hears this program and others to realize how important it is for NASA to recover absolutely the maximum amount of debris from the Columbia. It's amazing what can be done by analyzing that debris, even after it has gone through the very traumatic events that we all know it has. So the public really has to, I hope, will diligently and vigorously cooperate in this investigation. The debris field is very large. It's going to take a large number of people to help do this, and as soon as something is identified, then local emergency authorities should be notified so it can be recovered and protected.
I want to talk to you about some of the maneuvers that you identify. The shuttle performs what are called S-turns. As I understand it, Senator, this helps them decrease the speed. Is there any reason to think that perhaps the turns themselves, if they're run by computer and they malfunction even in the slightest degree, that could put destructive forces on the space shuttle?
Well, there's always a possibility that those things happen, although the pilots are there monitoring that those maneuvers and are in a position to act as a backup. One of the unique things about the American space program throughout the years is that the final backup is always the pilot, and they monitor what the computers do very efficiently and very nice, but computers being computers, they sometimes can tell the spacecraft to do the wrong thing, and that's why the pilots monitor it so closely. So again, that's something that the telemetry and other things I think will help us try to understand.
If you had to make a guess, how quickly do you think they can get some answers here, Senator? Well,
on the one hand, I think it will take, because of the availability of the telemetry, and if the public and others are helpful in getting the debris collected expeditiously, then I think it's possible that there will be answers in a relatively short time frame, weeks or months. There is another factor, however, that I think everyone, and I'm sure NASA, is cognizant of. We have an operating space station, international station, in orbit, and the stand down of the rest of the shuttle fleet cannot be indefinite, because that's not only must the crew be serviced, but the space station itself must be serviced, and the shuttle is an essential part of that kind of operation. So a stand down for any indefinite period is just not going to be acceptable.
Correct.
And we have to have confidence in our other shuttle craft that they can indeed be launched and flown safely.
Former astronaut, former U.S. Senator Harrison Schmitt, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. We appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity, and on this extremely sad day.
It is indeed. Shock and grief gripping America as catastrophe strikes the Space Shuttle Columbia. Its crew of 7 astronauts all tragically have been lost. And there you see it unfolding before your very eyes on videotape. And we have enhanced some frames of that videotape so that you can see it a bit more closely. And there it is. It looks like a ball of flames, a bright light. And there you can see at least 4 different pieces. 3 there in that picture seem to have broken apart. The debris is now on the ground, confirmed to be that of Columbia. There are bits of metal and machinery and brackets and the grim details that we feel compelled to tell you of some human remains, though that has not been confirmed. It's gone, said one senior U.S. official. And indeed, a short time ago, as NASA held their news conference, their very first of the day, they disclosed that no one had survived, that this is a true national tragedy that happened just 16 minutes before landing